The text I got from my husband on the day I handed my mother the keys to a 4-bedroom house in Scottsdale read, "Mom doesn't want to see you. Stop coming here." I was standing in my mother's new driveway with a bow on the front door and a bottle of champagne in my hand when my phone buzzed with that message. My husband had sent it from inside the house. He was standing 20 feet away from me, on the other side of a door I had just paid $840,000 to put over her head. And what neither of them knew, what no one in that house knew, was what I had already set in motion before I ever pulled into that driveway. But none of it makes sense without the beginning, and the beginning is not a dramatic thing. The beginning is a house in Phoenix, a man I thought I knew completely, and 7 years of a marriage I had built the way you build anything that matters, one careful decision at a time, with your whole attention, believing the foundation was solid. My name is Vivian. I go by Viv to people who know me, and to my mother, who has called me that since I was old enough to answer to a name. I'm 39, and for the past 11 years, I've run my own interior design firm, Aldrich & Co., based in Scottsdale, Arizona. The firm started as a one-woman operation working out of my second bedroom, taking on residential clients who couldn't afford the big studios and needed someone willing to work for the project rather than the billing hour. It grew because I was good, and because I worked without stopping, and because I had a particular instinct for what people wanted from their spaces before they had the language to tell me. By the time this story begins, Aldrich & Co. had 12 full-time employees, a studio in Old Town Scottsdale, and a client list that included 3 of the most photographed restaurant interiors in the state. The revenue was real. The money I had made was mine, established and documented, built entirely from my own effort before and during my marriage to a man named Brett Whitmore. Brett was 42, 3 years older than me, a civil engineer with a regional infrastructure firm, solid income, a clean manner, and the particular brand of steady reliability that I had valued enormously when I met him at 32, and that I had, over the course of 7 years, gradually come to understand was something slightly different from what I had originally thought it was. Not unreliable. Brett was never unreliable in the concrete sense. He showed up when he said he would. He remembered the things he was supposed to remember. He handled the parts of a shared life that he had agreed to handle. But there was a quality to his reliability that I can now identify as conditional in a way I missed for a long time, because the conditions were not stated, and were only fully revealed when they were violated. He was reliable as long as things were arranged to his satisfaction. He was reliable as long as his mother was content. And his mother's contentment was, I would come to understand, the governing variable of everything. Sandra Whitmore, Brett's mother. 67 years old, widowed 12 years ago, living in a condo in Tempe that Brett owned and had been paying the mortgage on since his father died, a fact I had known from before we were married and had accepted as an expression of filial responsibility that I respected. Sandra was a small woman with silver blonde hair and the particular precision of someone who had decided, at some point decades ago, that being underestimated was a useful position and had since weaponized it to an art form. She was pleasant to my face for the first 2 years of the marriage, present at dinners, appreciative of the food I cooked, complimentary about the design work she had seen in the magazine features Aldrich & Co. had landed. I had thought in those early years that we had managed the mother-in-law dynamic with unusual grace. I had thought we genuinely liked each other. I had been wrong in that thorough, fundamental way that only becomes visible in retrospect. My own mother, Diane, was 63. She was a retired elementary school librarian who lived in a 2-bedroom rental in Mesa, a rental she had occupied for 9 years, since my father's death had left her without the financial cushion that would have allowed her to stay in the house they'd shared. She managed on her Social Security, a small pension from the school district, and a frugality that she applied with the patient discipline of someone who has learned that money is an environment you adapt to rather than a problem you solve. She never complained. That was the thing about my mother that I had always both admired and found heartbreaking. She never complained, which meant you had to pay close attention to know when things were hard. I paid close attention. I had been paying close attention my whole life. My mother's rental had a crack in the bathroom ceiling that the landlord had been promising to fix for 3 years. It had a gas stove with one burner that didn't light properly and required a match every time. It had windows that let in a draft in January that my mother covered with the insulating plastic film you could buy at a hardware store for $12, and she redid it every November with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone for whom this was simply a thing that was done. The carpet in the living room was the color of old oatmeal and had a texture like something had happened to it years ago that no amount of cleaning had fully remedied. She had made it pleasant. She was deeply creative in the way that librarians sometimes are, surrounded by color and texture and objects that held meaning, but there was a limit to what creativity could do for a space that was fundamentally inadequate, and I was aware of that limit every time I walked through her front door. I had been planning to buy her a house. Not as a spontaneous gesture, but as a worked-toward goal, something I had been moving toward for approximately 3 years, building toward it in the specific financial way I built toward things, setting aside money from Aldrich & Co.'s profits into a separate account I had opened in my name alone, because the profits of the firm were mine in the premarital sense even after the marriage, something I had been careful about from the beginning on the advice of a financial planner I trusted. By the time I was ready to act, I had $620,000 in that account, a mortgage pre-approval for an additional $250,000, and a relationship with a buyer's agent who had been showing me properties in Scottsdale and Tempe for 4 months while I found the right one. I had not told Brett I was planning this. That omission, which I had initially framed to myself as wanting to surprise my mother, was in retrospect also a function of something I didn't consciously name yet, a developing awareness that Brett's response to things involving my mother was not reliably kind. The house I found was on a cul-de-sac in North Scottsdale, built in 2019, 4 bedrooms, a third of which my mother would use as a studio for the watercolor painting she had taken up after retirement, and that she was genuinely talented at. It had a kitchen with proper light and appliances that worked, a covered porch facing the backyard garden area, and a neighborhood with walkable streets and nearby amenities that would matter increasingly as my mother aged. The asking price was $860,000. My agent negotiated it to $840,000. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday in April. I told no one except my agent and my attorney, who handled the closing documents, and my best friend Laurel, who had known about the account and the plan from the beginning, and who cried for 4 minutes straight when I texted her the signed contract. I should tell you what was already happening with Brett by this point, because the timeline matters, and I don't want to tell this as if the house was the cause of what broke. It wasn't. The house revealed what was already broken. What was already broken had been developing for the better part of 2 years, quietly and in the specific ways that slow deteriorations develop, through increments too small individually to constitute a crisis and too consistent collectively to be explained away indefinitely. The first real shift I noticed, and this is the one I should have examined more carefully when it happened, was around the time Brett's mother began spending more time at our house. Sandra's condo in Tempe was fine, adequately sized, and she had friends nearby, a social infrastructure that seemed healthy and sufficient. But approximately 2 years before the house purchase, she had begun appearing at our home with increasing frequency, not just for the Sunday dinners that had been the established pattern, but on weekday evenings, mid-afternoon visits, the kind of presence that fills a space differently than scheduled company does. She would arrive, and Brett would light up in a particular way, reorganizing his attention toward her with a completeness that edged me out of the room's gravity without any individual act that could be named as exclusionary. It was the accumulation of it. The way he stopped asking about my day when Sandra was there. The way conversations I had started would be redirected, sometimes mid-sentence, by something Sandra said that Brett found more interesting. The way he deferred to her preferences, what to eat, what to watch, how to spend the evening, in a manner that made me feel, progressively, and without dramatic incident, like a guest in my own house. I tried to talk to him about it twice. The first time he listened with what appeared to be genuine attention and said he understood and that he would be more mindful, and for about 3 weeks things were genuinely better, and I thought we fixed it. The second time, which came 4 months later when the pattern had reasserted itself, he was less receptive. He sat with his arms folded in the way he sat when he was managing defensiveness, and he said, with a careful patience that was actually irritation wearing a different coat, "She's my mother, Viv. She's alone."
"What do you want me to do?" And I said I didn't want him to do anything except be present when she wasn't there, and he said, "I am present," and we sat in the particular silence of two people who are using the same words to mean different things, and the conversation didn't go anywhere. There was also the matter of money. Not a dramatic matter. Brett managed our joint household account with the same civil engineer's precision he brought to everything, and there was nothing missing, nothing fraudulent, nothing overtly wrong. But Sandra's condo mortgage, which Brett had always paid, had been joined by other expenses. Her car insurance after she had an accident that raised her premiums, her property tax when she missed a payment one year, the new HVAC unit her condo needed the summer before last.
These were not small numbers individually, and they were a significant number collectively, and they came from the joint account. And while I contributed substantially to that account, and while I understood the concept of caring for a parent, there was a growing imbalance that I was increasingly aware of. Brett's mother's needs, funded partly by my work, were a consistent and unexamined priority, while the conversation about my own mother's circumstances had never happened. Not because I hadn't tried to have it. I had brought it up twice in the context of the general discussion of our finances and what we might do together to improve my mother's housing situation. And both times Brett had nodded and said, "Absolutely, we should think about that." And both times the conversation had ended without advancing and had not been revisited. That was the thing I held in the quiet place inside myself, where I kept track of the real accounting. Not the numbers exactly, but the pattern of attention. What mattered enough to act on, and what was left to the category of, "Absolutely, we should think about that." Sandra's HVAC unit, acted on immediately, without discussion. My mother's cracked bathroom ceiling that the landlord wouldn't fix? We should think about that. I thought about it myself. I opened the account, I made the plan, and on a Saturday morning in late April, I drove to my mother's rental in Mesa with a handwritten card and a single key on a plain metal ring, and I sat down across from her at her kitchen table, the one with the wobbly leg she had shimmed with a folded piece of cardboard, the one she had covered with a cheerful yellow tablecloth, and I told her about the house. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked at the key in her hand with the expression of someone who is trying to understand whether the reality in front of them matches the words they have just heard. And then she said very quietly, "Vivian." Just my name. And I said, "It's yours, Mom. Let me show you." We drove out together, and I watched her walk through it. I want to hold this memory carefully, because it belongs to the part of this story that is entirely good, entirely mine, entirely untouched by what came after. She walked through the front door and stopped in the entryway, and the morning light was coming through the south-facing windows in a way that made the room glow, and she stood in that light for a moment with her hand over her mouth. She went through every room slowly, not saying much, touching things, the windowsills, the kitchen counter, the built-in bookshelves in what would become her studio, with a gentleness that said she was checking that they were real. In the studio room, she stood at the window that looked out to the garden, and she turned to me, and her eyes were full, and she said, "The light in here is extraordinary." And I said, "I know, that's why I picked it." She laughed then, through the tears, the specific laugh of a woman who has known her daughter long enough to find this exactly right. And I put my arm around her, and we stood there in the light together. I had arranged for the celebration, a small thing, just my mother and me and Laurel's husband Dave, a bottle of champagne on the front porch of the new house. I had told Brett that morning that I was buying my mother a house, finally, that the closing was done, and that I was going over to celebrate with her. I had told him he was welcome to join us. I had told him the address. What I had not done, I want to be clear about this, was ask his permission. It was my money, from my account,
purchasing a house in my mother's name. I had not needed his permission, and I had not sought it. And my failure to seek it was, as I would shortly learn, the thing Brett had decided to make the incident about. I was standing in the driveway when the text came. Champagne in one hand, phone in the other, the late afternoon light doing the thing Arizona light does in spring, warm and clean and completely indifferent to the content of what I was about to read. Mom doesn't want to see you. Stop coming here. I stared at the screen. I read it twice. The champagne was cool in my hand, and the bow on the front door was moving slightly in the breeze. And the absurdity of the moment, the specific, almost architectural absurdity of receiving this message from a man who was inside a house I had just paid $840,000 for, occupied my brain for a full 5 seconds before the anger arrived. And when the anger arrived, it was not hot. It was extremely cold and extremely clear, and it organized itself very quickly into something useful. I turned around and walked back to my car. I set the champagne carefully on the passenger seat. I sat with my hands on the wheel, and I breathed twice, very deliberately, the way I breathe when a client situation has gone sideways, and I need to respond from clarity rather than reaction. And then I thought about what I already knew, what I had already set in motion weeks before this moment, in a conversation with a woman named Patricia Hale, who was an attorney specializing in family law and financial planning, and who had been helping me with something that Brett did not know about, and that Sandra Whitmore was very shortly going to wish had never existed. But first, I need to tell you what I had found 6 weeks before the house purchase closed, because the house was not just a gift to my mother. It was also, in its timing and its structure, a response to something I had learned, something that had changed my understanding of my marriage, my husband, and the woman who was standing inside that front door instructing Brett to tell me I wasn't welcome. The discovery came the way discoveries usually do, not through a dramatic search, but through an accident of proximity and timing. I had been working late at the Aldrich & Co. studio on a project deadline, and I had come home at 10:30 to find Brett already in bed, his laptop on the nightstand, which was unusual. He typically charged it in the kitchen. I needed to charge my own phone, and the charger on my nightstand was gone. Brett had apparently borrowed it and left it in the kitchen, and so I picked up his laptop from the nightstand to borrow his charger from it, and the screen woke up when I touched it. He had not closed his browser. The tab that was open was his email. I did not snoop on Brett's email as a habit. I was not a person who checked their partner's communications or went looking for evidence of things I was afraid existed. I had not been in that kind of marriage, or had not believed I had been. What I did in the next 60 seconds was not a planned act, but a reflexive one. I saw the subject line of the email he had been reading before he fell asleep, and the subject line was enough to make my eyes lock. It read, "Property transfer, timeline, and tax considerations." The sender was a law firm I didn't recognize. The recipient was Brett Whitmore and Sandra Whitmore, jointly. I sat on the edge of the bed
The text I got